Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Michael Cruz. I work at SuccessWorks at the College of Letters and Science, and we are happy to co-sponsor this event along with the Department of Geography. And we're here to hear from some awesome alumni about their career paths related to environmental sustainability, policy, and education. I would like to turn it over to Joel from the Department of Geography to give a quick welcome. And I'm going to actually stop my screen share. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Joel Grule. I'm the undergraduate advisor in the geography department for people who don't know me. Probably everybody knows me, though. On behalf of the geography department, I just wanted to offer a big thank you to our panelists tonight, Hannah, Larry, and Colin. I know you all are probably very busy, so thank you for taking the time to join us and to share your wealth of knowledge on environment-related careers. I also want to thank all the students who are joining us tonight, because I know you all are crazy busy, and this is a really important event. You're taking the time to learn about environment-related careers, which is great. And I sincerely hope that you learn a lot tonight and enjoy yourselves, have fun. I'll turn it over back to Mike.
Thanks, Joel. So yeah, without further ado, we're going to start hearing from our alumni. We will start with Larry Reed. So Larry, please tell us about your career path and some of your experiences in the field. Oh, Larry, I think you're muted.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, my career path was not a direct one. And I'll start out by telling you that I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. And in 1965, I had the experience of living through a direct hit by a Category 3 hurricane. And I didn't think at that time or for a long time that would have any impact on the work that I did. But I get a bachelor's degree in history at the University of New Orleans and a master's degree in geography at Uw-Madison, and had planned to get a PhD and teach at university, and that didn't work out. I had been in the Air Force as a medic, and after getting my degree, looking around for a job, I saw an ad in the newspaper that said the Monona Fire Department was looking for an ambulance driver. Drove ambulances as a medic. So I went to work there. And I worked there for 5 years as a firefighter EMT. And that played a large part in my getting hired by the Wisconsin Division of Emergency Management. And I worked there for 28 years. So how does that relate to environment and geography? Well, in a lot of ways, because we dealt with disasters, with making plans to mitigate disasters, and then respond, and then recovery. And you encounter a lot of environmental concerns with that. The first program I worked in was radiological emergency preparedness. And I was hired soon after the nuclear power plant accident at 3 Mile Island. And for 8 years, I worked in the program that did disaster plans for the areas around nuclear power plants. And at the time there were 6 that affected Wisconsin. And some main concerns with those plants in an accident would be the contamination, not only of people, but of the agricultural system. So we did a lot of work with the Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture, and with local units of government, counties and cities that were in those designated planning zones. And this is where my hurricane experience came into play, because I could talk to them as someone who had been through a disaster. We didn't have a nuclear power plant accident, that was good. I went on from there to being a regional director for 15 years and was responsible for direct coordination with 14 counties and their municipalities on their disaster plans. That included plans for mitigation, how do we reduce the effect of the disaster, for response, and then for recovery. And in recovery, we also focused on things that could lessen the impact of future disasters. And with flooding that we have here in Wisconsin, that was an important aspect of it. And the geography came into place, my geology classes came into place because I understood those physical systems and often would engage in conversations with local officials about why we needed to have mitigation programs. Because the federal government wisely felt that it was not good to pay to keep correcting problems in the same place without taking some kind of action to reduce the impact of the problem. So that often meant buying properties that were in low-lying areas. In one area in Kenosha County, the state and the federal government acquired over 50 residences in an area that had repeated flooding. And those people got their houses bought at market value through a grant program that was administered by the agency I worked for, and we moved those people out of there. We had programs like that around the state. We had programs that related to big snow events, wind events. We had wind events in northern counties where the debris removal cost far exceeded the annual budgets of township and village governments. And we got federal money to help clean up all the mess. And as part of that, we had to look at what kind of mitigation activities that we could do to reduce any further impact. I'll wind up by saying that because of the work that I did and my background, I had a chance to teach at UW Green Bay for 12 years. After the 9/11 event in New York City, the federal government had a lot of concern about preparing communities for terrorist events and all kinds of disasters. And through a person at our work, they put me into contact with people at Green Bay. And for 12 years, I taught 2 courses that looked at the overall aspect of emergency management, mitigation, planning, preparedness, and recovery, the 4 main aspects of it. And I taught one course that focused on how does a community organize itself to respond to a disaster. I did get to teach at university, and it was enjoyable. I quit when they wanted me to start teaching like we're doing now. I did not want to teach over a computer. The interaction with the students was just too rich and too valuable to not have that. And I'll answer any questions that you guys have. I think one other thing I would tell the students, when you go job hunting, you might not exactly find the job that you think you're looking for. But when you apply, you need to look at your whole life and how your whole life fits into what that employer wants in an employee. And so just don't narrowly focus on what your degree is. And I have to say that I feel very satisfied with the work life that I had. And now I'm retired, and I'm glad I'm not working that hard anymore. And I'll answer any questions that you guys have.
All right, thanks, Larry. Next, we'll hear from Hannah Singh.
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I am currently a forestry and restoration specialist at Adaptive Restoration. We are a forestry and land management company based out of Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. I have not always been here. During my undergrad, I majored in geography and environmental studies. In the summer after my sophomore year, I got an internship with the Madison Audubon Society, which is doing similar work, but at the Fayetteville what is it? Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting. I'm blanking. At Fayetteville Grove. It's like a land sanctuary out in Lake Mills, Wisconsin. And so I did a summer internship there doing mostly herbicide management. And then the following summer, I started interning here at Adaptive Restoration. Welcome to my office. And I kept in contact with them throughout my senior year. And so they do forestry and land management, which includes prescribed burning. So the spring of my senior year, I came back and I did a prescribed burn season with them, which was really cool. And then shortly thereafter, I left for Peace Corps, and I spent about 10 months in West Africa doing the Peace Corps, which I can talk more about, but relating to like environment and geography and stuff like that, that was I was a health volunteer, so I didn't super relate. But yeah, I can talk more about that if that is something people want to hear about. But unfortunately, we got evacuated due to COVID. So I've been back stateside since March of 2020. And I reached back out to Adaptive and asked if I could have my job back. They said yes. And so I have grown a lot in my role. I came back as a forestry and restoration intern, but last October I got promoted. So now I'm a specialist. And so I do a pretty wide range of things at my job. My main realm, I guess, in which I work is doing seed acquisition and then like figuring out how, like who, what, where, when, why, and how to spread that seed for different native landscapes. A huge part of my job is prescribed fire, and I think that the next thing that I want to do is probably going out west and doing wildland firefighting. So I'm doing as many trainings as I can right now in order to be more qualified to do ignitions and stuff like that out west on big fires. And yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I do not have as an extensive as a career history yet. I only graduated in 2019. Yeah, that's what I've got.
Great, thanks both of you. So our third panelist, Colin, is going to be joining us a little bit late, so he should be coming pretty soon. And so when he does, we'll ask him to introduce himself. But to get started, so students, this is your time to ask questions. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and come on mic and ask it, or just put a question in the chat and we can read it and have our panelists answer. I have a question to get started. Can you talk about some of the skills that you developed while you were at Uw-Madison that helped you in the course of your career? Maybe Hannah, go ahead and go first since you were just starting. Yeah.
That is a great question. During my undergrad, I did the Community and Environmental Scholars Program through the Nelson Institute, and they were super helpful in, I guess professionally speaking, they were super helpful in making sure that I had a good working resume that I could easily edit and send in places. They put me in good touch with a very strong network of like-minded environmentalist types of people. I showed up to class and I did everything that I could to do well. So that was a big thing. I think one of the more influential things that I did during my undergrad that I think helps me be a successful person is I tried really hard during my capstone. I worked very hard on my capstone project because that was like the first project that I really felt like I could like dig my nails into, I guess. And that was the first time that I felt like I saw something come from work that I was doing, because my capstone project was me and a couple of other people were looking at potential land acquisition in Greene County and figuring out what kind of landscape restoration we could do there. And so we put a formal report together, and it kind of mirrors what I now do in writing land management plans. So I think that was, I would say that the most important parts are, yeah, consistent effort and, I don't know, making sure that you are doing the things that you think that you want to do is really important. Like I always tried to take classes that aligned with my interests, and that really pushed me to where I'm at now.
Thank you. Larry, go ahead.
I think what helped me from my graduate days was the research that I had to do on my master's thesis. I wrote my master's thesis on agricultural development, Xinjiang province of China. And it was really hard to find information. And I spent a lot of time in the library going through catalogs and really digging this stuff out. When I got hired by the state, I knew zero about nuclear power plants. And I asked my wife, I said, should I even apply for this job? Because I don't know anything about nuclear power. She says, well, the job description says something about working on maps. Well, I know about maps. So when I interviewed for the job, the fact that I had some cartographic skills, although not great, and research skills, and worked for a volunteer fire department. They thought I'd be a good match working with local communities. And I had to educate myself on a lot of issues relating to nuclear power use, nuclear power plants, and accidents. So my first supervisor had me read solidly for a month. I never left my desk, and I read for a month. And I purchased several books on my own to educate myself, because we had to work with people from the State Health Department Radiation Section Protection, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, and you couldn't go to meetings with those people and not be conversant with the language of the subject. So I think the researching that I did and teaching myself how to find information helped me in my job.
Thanks,
Right.
Larry.
I should also say that the cartography was very valuable, because they had a mishmash of maps for each of the different nuclear power plants. There was nothing common between the maps for the 6 plants. And there was a lot of federal guidance about the data that need to be on maps. And working with our state health department, we came up with a set of 6 maps that eventually had all of the data that the federal government required. And at the time, we were co-located with DOT, and I met a draftsman over there, and we were able to produce a series of 6 maps for each nuclear power plant that we had to plan for, that had the same data, the same format, the same outlook. And when we got ready to do an exercise, we would send the maps out to all the local state agencies, federal agencies, say, do you have changes to make? And we would make those changes prior to the exercise. So knowing some about cartography was a big help. And my wife was right, as they often are.
Thanks, Larry. So we have a couple questions in the chat, which we'll get to in a minute, but I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Colin Higgins. Thanks for joining us, Colin. We just got through the other 2 panelists spent a little time introducing themselves, and they talked about their career paths after UW and some of the current work that they're doing now or have done recently. So I'm wondering if you could just get started and take a few minutes to do the same intro.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize for being a few minutes late. One of the downsides of my job is I have meetings that come up last minute that sort of blow up an evening every once in a while. But thank you so much for letting me be here. My name is Colin Higgins. I graduated from Uw-Madison in 2015 from the geography program with studied geography, environmental studies, and history. I then did an MPA at the La Follette School. And then because I just wasn't satisfied with that many degrees, did an MPhil in geography at the University of Oxford. And so I actually started out doing, I worked with Professor Morgan Robertson. I don't know how many of you take his classes, but if you do, tell him I say hi. But I started out being very interested in sort of this, market-based environmental policy and sort of looking at the politics of that as it plays out on the ground. Through grad school, I was also working on a gubernatorial campaign in Michigan. I, have this unfortunate habit of overextending myself on campaigns. So if you have any questions on getting involved on that side of things, I'm happy to talk about that. But as I was working on this campaign, I was living in Detroit, Michigan, and I got really interested, as geographers do, like how did Detroit become Detroit, right? As sort of emblematic of many features of American life and sort of written out on the landscape of Detroit. And what that ended up doing in this sort of like roundabout way is made me really interested in urban and political geography, and specifically the dynamic between city and suburb, and how decisions made both directly in economic policy and indirect decisions, something as indirect as the price of oil in the mid 1970s, can just radically transform both the landscape and the opportunities available to the people who live within Detroit and within the suburbs of Detroit. Happy to talk about suburbs and cities because I think about them a lot. From there, I was working on this campaign. We lost in a blaze of glory, and I ended up working for a nonprofit that did economic development. We worked nationally, worked with mayors and city and county executives to sort of help them think through economic development, specifically from a geographic perspective. I was doing that for the last couple of years, and then a year and a half ago, jumped over to my current job, which is at the NOAC Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University. So I am deputy director of that lab, and so that means I oversee all the different things we're doing and make sure we do the good ideas well, and make sure we do as few dumb things as possible. My boss, Bruce Katz, used to run Brookings Metropolitan Policy Institute. And so he and I just spend a bunch of time, running around to various cities or zooming around to various cities in the pandemic and thinking through sort of all facets of economic policy with, mayoral leadership, senior business leadership, philanthropic and community leadership in the city, and really thinking through how do these decisions play out geographically, right? And how, in the name of the lab, it's metro finance. So where does the money flow and how does it flow around, not just the city, but the metropolitan region? Our lab, like I currently live in Washington, D.C., and our lab is really focused on this interplay between local outcomes and federal decisions, and sort of being an intermediary between the local and federal and local. So we're working right now with a number of different parts of the Biden administration on initiatives from, economic competitiveness and investments in various types of industries through what's called the Build Back Better Challenge to, working with folks in the Department of Housing and Urban Development around, commercial corridors and home ownership initiatives in places as diverse as Detroit, LA, Dayton, Ohio, and Birmingham. So that's kind of like my weird roundabout career. I started off as an environmental guy, and now I'm like, deep down in the sort of mess of urban policy. But I think that the byline throughout has really been, or I should say, the through line has really been these two pieces of really looking at the spatial impacts of decisions that are made, whether that's around, wetlands and where we decide to build in wetlands, or, how changing a piece of financial regulation or the price of a commodity like oil can dramatically upend a whole region's economy. And then on the other hand, this question of policy relevance, right? Like, what type of information do decision makers need to actually help them make decisions as they're looking into the future and ideally informed by the past? So that's me. Excited to be here. I really enjoy UW-Madison geography, and it taught me to think about things in a way that has been really helpful through the last 6 years of my career.
Thanks, Colin. And actually, what you just said sort of touches on the question that Larry and Hannah were addressing right when you joined us, which was, if you could talk about some of the skills you gained at UW-Madison that helped you throughout your career. And it could be, of course, we want to talk about how great geography is, but it could, there's more to UW as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, I still remember this, I actually have, some people keep like folders of like ego clippings of like really good reviews or things they have. I have like the opposite of like reviews of papers that have just absolutely torn me to shreds. And I have one specifically that Professor Bill Cronin in his environmental history 460 class, I was in a section of that. And I wrote, we did these place papers. So you pick a place in I guess anywhere, a place that's important to you. You write sort of a short history of it. And, I did that and I turned it in and I was in the honors section. So he reviewed the paper and he just like, he went to town. He copy edited that thing. Like I had misplaced commas, periods all over the place. I was inarticulate. And he pretty much said like someone who has the degree of analytical focus that you do should not write this poorly. And he just like really worked to make me a better writer. And that is like the single thing that like I have really taken with me is sort of the adage of like clear, crisp communication, both in writing and then verbally, is like the most important thing I learned at UW. And I would just encourage everyone, like really focus on your writing. There are a lot of people like me right now who like are looking to hire people, and like writing is such an important thing, and being a clear communicator is so important. I think the second thing I would say, and then I will stop going off on my little soapbox, is I think one of the unique things about UW-Madison as compared to even some of the Ivy Leagues out there, is that it is such a big school with such a there are a mix of people from different walks of life, and it really teaches you, if you let it, how to interact with people at sort of all stages of life. And that's a really important skill, especially for going into a field like policymaking, where your decisions impact many different people, right? You have to be able to communicate to those in power, to those who are making decisions. You also have to be able to listen to and understand the positions of people who come from walks of life that are not your own. I think one of the really amazing things about the fact, University of UW-Madison is, a 40,000 person institution that is public, that intentionally reaches students from across the state, is that it gives you that the opportunity to learn from that diversity of perspectives. And if I was involved in student government and sort of various initiatives on campus that tried to push for and change the sustainability of the campus, but like working through that helps you learn how to interact with a diverse set of people. And that's again, like to get back to the communication point, like learning how both to speak to and listen to and learn from a variety of perspectives is really important. And it's right there at UW-Madison, and you can do it. It just requires like opening yourself to it.
That's a great segue. Thank you, Colin. I'm Maureen. I'm a career advisor with SuccessWorks. And I wanted to go back to questions for Hannah earlier, but it really relates to what you were saying about having those communication skills, being able to work with people from different diverse backgrounds. And Hannah got to be in the Peace Corps before coming back in March of 2020. Hannah, can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and also about the language skills? Were you able to communicate when you got on the ground?
I was not. I started applying fall of my senior year, and I was really just kind of I was like, I don't know what I want to do, so why not do the Peace Corps? And I didn't think that I would get accepted, but then I was applying to a couple different programs. So I initially sent my application into an environmental conservation position in Mexico, and that didn't work out. So I kept just kind of getting bounced around. And then eventually my application landed in Benin, and I applied, and I got accepted. And I told myself that I was going to take a French class before I got there. And I think I made it 3 weeks before deciding that I had that senioritis and I had to drop it. And so I got there in June of 2019, excuse me, and I did not speak a word of French. And I was like, gosh, I hope nobody notices. And I'm sure they did. So they put the first 3 months, the first 12 weeks of Peace Corps is a super intensive pre-service training. So you get grouped up and you live in villages, and you go to training every day, and you get your language skills, you get the skills that you need to do whatever sector you're in. So I was in rural community health. So I was a health volunteer. So I learned a lot about malaria and malaria prevention. I did a lot of work with sanitation and latrine building. I worked at environmental. I did a community garden, and all of the stuff like that. And a lot of being a Peace Corps volunteer is just maintaining a positive presence in your within your community, which is, everybody knows you. It's like you are the face of America to a lot of the people there. So it's a big responsibility. I had a really good time, and I am very disappointed that my experience got cut short. But yeah, language wise, for more competitive programs, so a lot of Latin America, they want you to have a really strong foundation in whatever language is spoken in that country. But other places like Francophone, not as many people have experience with that, so they're willing to take a wide variety of language skills, mine being 0, which was really nice of them. So I still speak French. I still, even though I'm not there anymore, I talk to my host family and a lot of people that I was connected to via WhatsApp. So I maintained my French a little bit. It's not as good as it used to be, but yeah, with languages, you really only need to know whatever like the main languages of that area. And then once you get to training, they start teaching you more of the local language. So I spoke Aja, which is the main language in southwestern Benin.
Thanks, Hannah. So I have a question, a communication related question. First for Hannah, and then I have a question for Larry. So Colin mentioned the importance of good writing in his job, and I think just in jobs in general, it's essential to have good writing skills. So Hannah, in your current job, doing restoration work, I imagine that communication is also very important. I'm trying to imagine, like, maybe you're working with landowners and helping them to restore their environments to past environments. Could you talk about the importance of communication to your job, and maybe how what you learned in undergrad may have helped you become a good communicator? You already mentioned 565, which is our, for those of you who are not geography students, it's our senior research capstone class. And so students work in small groups and they do a substantive research project. And part of that entails writing a massive research paper. And then after that, I have a question, a communication related question for Larry.
Okay, so for my job, I do frequently contact landowners, and it's a lot of back and forth communication about things like what budgetary constraints that they have, and then how that aligns with the long-term goals of their land. And so I'll put them in contact with a lot of different like government agencies like NRCS or things like that to figure out what different ways that they can get funding. And being the face of a professional organization means that everything needs to be clear cut, like cross the T's and dot the I's and stuff like that. And what I learned during my undergrad is it feels like, for example, like every email that I send is like my final presentation. So like during my capstone, I remember writing draft after draft and trying to get things perfect, and it would take forever, but I was always happy with the final result. And now it's like every single time I have to talk to somebody, it has to be the final presentation. Like that has to be the top notch of what I'm doing. So you kind of have to get used to trying really hard all the time, which sometimes I think during your undergrad, you can get away with not trying as hard all of the time. But yeah, especially when it is suddenly in a professional capacity, everything's got to be, it's got to be the good stuff all the time. So I guess it really pays to double check things before you send them, because you can't unsend emails.
Thanks, Hannah. So Larry, I have a communication related question for you. You mentioned that you've taught some college level courses. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that one of the classes focused on disaster preparedness and fostering that in communities, working with communities to make sure that they're prepared for dealing with disasters. I'm going to take a wild guess and say that communication is central to that, to being effective in preparing communities for disaster. Could you talk about how essential communication was in that role for you, in how what you studied, and how geography, your studies in geography might have contributed to your communication skills?
I think it was, and people have told me this, oh, you have an easy way of talking with people. And I think I realized that I really did not need to talk down to anyone, that was a big no. And I could be talking to people from the state health department who were epidemiologists, or somebody from the federal government who was a nuclear engineer, or someone who was the town chair of a town in northern Wisconsin. And I noticed a gradual change the longer I worked. At first, I was that state guy from Madison. And as I worked with people and constantly reminded them that Wisconsin is a home rule state, and that the local elected official is the person who's ultimately in charge, that we have guidance and laws from the federal government that we have to follow. And then explain that to people in, not in legalese language or anything like that. And so I had to regulate my communications dependent upon where I was talking. And that's where all of the reading came in. Because when I was talking to that nuclear engineer or epidemiologist about bird flu or whatever it was, I could talk about that. When I was talking to local elected officials, the fact that I was an Air Force medic and a veteran and was a member of a local volunteer fire department, eventually I wasn't that guy from the state. I was Larry, who's coming here to work with us. And it was communications, constantly and working on it, and trying to read and get a sense of the room that you were in at the time. I remember the state of Wisconsin was approached to have a huge 3-day nuclear power plant exercise with the plant in Zion, Illinois. And we were at this planning meeting in Chicago. And there were people there from big wheels from FEMA and the Department of Energy, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Illinois officials. And we went there with a sense of what we wanted the scenario to be participants, but not get overwhelmed by this huge exercise. And we didn't want our counties to be overwhelmed. And we had put together a proposal for a scenario, and I presented it. And they liked it. And I remember sitting there in the room thinking, this is little Larry Reed from New Orleans, and he's meeting with all of these big wheels and they're buying his cell. And we had a successful exercise, and we worked with the state agencies and we worked with the county and local officials who are going to be involved in this. And, you know, you got to explain the benefit, and you're going to benefit from this. And 3 Mile Island was still fresh in a lot of people's minds. And so as, like I said, I worked there for 28 years, and, you know, I was really not that guy from the state anymore. It's Larry who's come here to work with us and not tell us what to do.
So very valuable. Thank you. Students, are there any questions that are coming up as you're hearing all of these pieces of knowledge coming up? Got a long one here. Thank you, Alexis. Let's see. So CART GIS and human geography. So looking in the chat, panelists, do any of you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I can take a first cut at it, but would appreciate others adding on and nuancing what I say. I mean, I think I'll approach this in 3 ways. The first is, you know, within the like broad realm of corporate sustainability and ESG, I think, yeah, I just have a lot of questions for you, Alexis, to distill a bit more specificity there. You know, one is like, do you want to work within the state of Wisconsin, or do you want to work nationally, right? Because those are 2 different strategies. Within Wisconsin, there are folks, and I don't know if Tom Eggert is still affiliated with Uw-Madison, but I know he is like very plugged into the world of corporate sustainability in Wisconsin. And so I think, you know, and this sort of gets at my one of my like theories of careers, which is like so much more is based on networks and, you know, having people see your work and understanding that you are you know, can contribute value in various ways to teams is, in my view, like that is a much more direct way than sort of finding all the various corporate sustainability jobs and sort of applying cold, right? You always want a warm connection there. And so I would recommend, you know, if you graduated last December, and I'm sorry because time is a flat line, and I can't remember if that's December of 2020 or December of 2019.
2020, yeah. I know the feeling.
You know, I would recommend like reaching out to some of the professors you were close with, and you know, like tapping them with regards to their contacts in that world. I think, you know, the second way I would approach this is, you know, there are a number of, I think it just depends on like which angle of corporate CSR or ESG you want to approach, because it's such a, like all paths, it's such a like wide world, and it like becomes very small the more focused you get. And the third one I would say is, you know, I know when I was in undergrad, which like who knows if it's still around, but knowing Paul Robbins, I assume it is that the Nelson Institute had a really good career board that was up. And I think, again, going back to my first point, the way I found that really useful was to find jobs and then reach out to people who may know someone in like a related field, not necessarily to apply for the job itself. Because again, every job I have applied to cold, I have not gotten. That's just not like that's just a me thing. I think I'm just like bad at writing cover letters. Like it may be a more universal thing, but like I haven't had success that route, so I don't recommend it personally. But you know, reaching out to someone who is at or near an organization that you want to work for because the job sounds interesting or sounds cool, and like having a conversation, right? Having an informational meeting and saying, like, what do you do day to day? Like, you know, yeah. So those are my pieces of advice on like how to begin to map that out. I'm happy to talk more in depth about it because I believe after this there's like more of a breakout, unless I like read the agenda wrong, which I also
That would be great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I also just want to chime in there, Alexis. American Family Insurance, having the headquarters here in Madison, is a big partner with the campus, but also has a good model, I think, for corporate social responsibility. So maybe just doing some digging around on their website to see what some of their initiatives are, as an example.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm trying to also thank you, Joel and Mr. Cruz. I appreciate it. I'll look at what you are sharing.
Any other questions coming up here? Let's see. All right. Colin, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile. I look at lots of LinkedIn profiles all the time, and I tell students I'm not stalking, I'm just exploring. I'm doing my research. You went straight into graduate school, and students often have that question of what's the right program? When should I go? Why would I go right in or wait and get experience? So you did a master's in public affairs. What other programs were you considering? Why did you choose that one over something else?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I like to say I went into all those programs despite the best advice, not because of it. Which is to say, you know, my junior year, and I think the La Follette School still does this. This was prior to them offering an undergrad program, but they had an accelerated master's in public affairs. And I actually applied for the master's in international public affairs, which goes to show you, like, I didn't really know myself well junior year because I did not do that work right now. But I applied for that just because I was doing a lot of work that was sort of government related, and I was just kind of curious. Like, I never took a political science class, which like surprises all of my coworkers and friends now. And I was just like, I wanted to learn more. It was 1 year, so like economically it was a pretty good deal where you could do a master's degree in 1 year after undergrad, and so it seemed to make a lot of sense. So I applied for it because it was at Uw-Madison. I wasn't evaluating other programs. I wasn't, in fact, I was very much like, even as I look back at that, I view that as an extension of my undergrad more so than a sort of graduate program, in and of itself. The second grad degree I got was an MPhil in geography. And again, it was the only program I applied for. And I applied for it because I applied for the Rhodes Scholarship. And I was not planning to go to grad school. It's kind of like I threw a Hail Mary and someone actually caught it type situation. So like, I mean, my advice on this is like, knowing a lot of people who have gone to grad school straight out and knowing a number who have taken time to do a career first, all the advice I was given was correct, which is to say, like, it is good to take like a year or two, not only financially, right? Like, grad school is a bit of a financial hit. Even if you are fully funded, like stipends don't always go as far as you might imagine they would. But like, it also helps to, like, I would have done so much differently had I taken a couple of years to like really learn the ropes, because there are a lot of questions I have now that I just don't have time for research, right? My job is to research questions and I still don't have time to research questions. So I think like spending a bit of time beforehand is well recommended. That said, like, you too can throw away my advice the way I threw away the advice of everyone who advised me.
All right, thank you. Hannah, let's see. Being at Adaptive Restoration, you had internships, you had course projects that sounded like helped prepare you for that. What is your advice for someone who may not have had those specific experiences, but wants to get that field experience? How do you do that, especially as like a geography major, or maybe a major that isn't directly like science, life science related?
Yeah. Field experience can be very hard to come by. And one thing that we've definitely been noticing with applicants, just like as positions here open up, is that like when I was initially applying, a lot of the people that would apply were just like me, where I had like a summer of experience doing field work, but no substantial like education in the field. And now what we're noticing is that even just for internship positions, we're getting a lot of people with like master's degrees that have never had any fieldwork experience. And again, that is because fieldwork can be kind of hard to come by, because a lot of the time it's using like power equipment. And if you don't have experience, it's hard to get experience when you don't have experience. And I absolutely understand that struggle. So I think that the best way to get in on that is just reaching out to different faculty and stuff like that. Like I had a friend that was in BioCore, and so she got me in on just like some like prairie seedings and stuff like that. So I was able to include that kind of thing. I had done some volunteer work with like the Driftless Area Land Conservancy, just like pretty much just walking around and looking at flowers and stuff. But just having the ability to say that you have like a connection to an organization, and like I have done X, Y, and Z, even if it's small, it shows that like you've done something, and that is kind of all you can get sometimes. But yeah, there frequently are like for jobs like I have, there's summer internships in lots of different places depending on how mobile you're feeling. Let's see, like I know a couple of my coworkers have like done work with AmeriCorps out west doing invasive species removal. The Prairie Enthusiasts, the Nature Conservancy. There's also a ton of different private companies in our area, like Quercus, Good Oak, other places like that, where there's internship opportunities. Even just like reaching out, sometimes you can reach out to them and see maybe if you can just go out and help on a burn, or maybe like give yourself a part-time availability for something in the summer when we're mostly at our peak season and stuff like that. So if you want to get experience, a lot of it is just you kind of have to go out of your way, and you have to make yourself available, and you have to be ready to work hard.
Very true.
Thanks, Hannah. I have a question for Larry. Larry, do you have any advice for students who want to get into the field of disaster preparedness, disaster management? What sorts of things could students be doing now in order to prepare themselves for a career in that field?
I think having some background in cartography would help, and because it certainly helped me. Understanding how government works at different levels of government. And there used to be a lot of volunteer opportunities with fire departments and ambulance services, and that's turning so professional now that it's hard to kind of get in on the ground floor, so to speak, the way I did. And are there any classes at the university that focus on disaster management? And I would take those. Because the class that one of the classes that I taught at Green Bay was a comprehensive look at emergency management and in all of the 4 phases. And most of the students in the class were in law enforcement, fire, We had some people that had a kind of like a semi-private search and rescue and rapid water response business. And a woman who was a safety expert for one of the large construction companies in Wisconsin. So it was a real mix of people. Some were changing majors. Some wanted to get hired in emergency management, and they saw those courses along with their practical job experience as a way to do that. And I had no idea that the field existed. I was applying all over the place for a job. And anything that I thought that I had any kind of applicable skill for. So I would say if you're interested in that, see if you can find an academic course somewhere where you can learn something about it. Look at your local emergency management agencies and if they're advertising for positions, and see what kinds of positions they have and how your skills might apply there. And think of your skills in the broadest sense, your writing skills, your spoken communication skills, and any practical things that you may have done. Things like the field work with some of the environmental groups, that could be something that would help you. So you really have to look at yourself and all of what you've done. I just really searched the job application sites, the newspaper, the state, the county, the city. It wouldn't be just for emergency management, but I'd say for anything. And see how your skills and your interests fit those job descriptions.
Well, thank you, Larry. And I see Joel put something in the chat. There are some courses in this area, so students can check those out. I have sort of a more general question for all three of our panelists. Maybe we'll start with Hannah. What are some of the most rewarding or satisfying parts of your work? And then what are some of the most challenging parts of your work?
Some of the most rewarding parts are I genuinely feel very accomplished at the end of most work days because the gratification is pretty instant with a lot of the work that we do. So like right now, as we're transitioning into the fall, it's prescribed burn season. And so we'll go out and we'll do a burn, and there's a checklist of different things that we have to do to make sure that everything is done safely and efficiently, or like just making sure that everything is done within, everything is legal. It's always super important. And making sure that everyone gets home safe that always gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling at the end of the day. So that's good. I really enjoy the gratification that comes with it, and that like I've worked at some different sites for like 3 years now, and from starting in 2018 until now, I can see a huge difference in like floristic quality, and there's like much more diverse species, and I have taken on a more leadership role for a bunch of the different sites that we're at. So I have 3 different properties that I manage, and I enjoy that a lot. One of the more difficult things is that a lot of what I do specifically, it's definitely a male dominated field. So being a woman, kind of breaking in and getting the work done, especially doing things like using a chainsaw, using a tractor, like doing ignition on a fire and stuff like that. It's like you're kind of hard pressed to find girls doing that. And I have really enjoyed being kind of like the welcoming face of my company. Like I do a lot of different interviews and stuff like that. And I'll talk a lot about how difficult it can be to be a girl in this field, and just almost the competitiveness of keeping up with the guys. And so that is definitely a huge challenge. And I feel like I do have to work harder to keep up with it, but I do feel like I keep up with it. So I think it's a challenge, but it is also extremely rewarding.
Cool, thank you.
I'm happy to jump in and quickly talk on you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly of my job. I mean, right, like I'll start with the bad, which is like yeah, I work a lot. I feel like the work-life balance thing definitely skews more towards work with my job currently. Like I showed up 15 minutes late to a thing at 6:30 my time because I had meetings all day that ran long, and right, like it gets a bit hectic after a while. And I think there are ways of managing that, ways of like setting boundaries, and it's important and an ongoing struggle. But I think, right, like the problem with the type of work, right, policy think tank type work, and the sort of associated demands of government, right, is like if you do it well, you will be asked to do it a lot more. And somewhat a mentor of mine once told me the adage that his brother had was, the prize for winning a pie eating contest is that you get to eat more pie. And so I think about that a lot. And that's definitely, right, it's like a good thing and a bad thing, because if you like the work you do, that's awesome. But if it's the wrong type of pie, like it's miserable. I think the other thing that like can be a bit, I think is like solidly in the middle of the good and bad is like, sort of opposite of Hannah, the problems that I work to solve are very much on the like long-term, you're just like chipping away bit by bit towards a solution. And it can feel like you finish a month and you're like, what do I have to show for it aside from like some papers I've written, some meetings I've had, like a potential decision in some city that then like gets scuttled because the city council feels a different way about things. Right, it like can be really I don't know, frustrating. I think on the flip side, the good is like when it works and when you actually land something, when the plane like lands on the tarmac, wheels down, and you're like there, and there's a decision that is signed, an announcement that is made. For example, like a while ago, I was working with the city of Birmingham and the mayor and a coalition of public and private stakeholders like signed a thing that was 200 units of affordable housing in the city. Some of it was dedicated to formerly incarcerated individuals. It was like revitalizing the downtown. It was just like you feel like you actually like take a dent out of some of these problems that are really intractable, and that's a good thing. I think the other thing is like I find this work just really interesting. Like, I'm never bored with it because it's like this sort of like I guess like the grim way to look at it is that there are a lot of like really difficult problems that come to ground in cities. The positive way is like there's so many ways to try and address things that we have been unable to address for a long time, and it requires sort of all of the mental capacity and sort of relational resources you can bring to it to actually try and like solve them. And I find that personally like just really intellectually fulfilling, because it's like the most complicated puzzle you will ever work on. But that's, I mean, it's obviously like the upshot of that, like not for everyone. It takes really knowing what you like doing, and also like understanding what you are good at and what you're not as good at. Like I would not trust myself managing a prairie burn. Be bad for everyone involved.
I guess what gave me a lot of satisfaction is when we'd have a disaster in the state and we would get a presidential disaster declaration, all of the assistance that came in for individuals and local units of government. So the federal government would pick up 75% of the cost of the response for any local jurisdiction that was included in a disaster declaration. And the state of Wisconsin would split that remaining 25% even with each jurisdiction. And that was always good to see. Local units of government, especially cities, smaller cities, villages, townships, getting some financial assistance to help them repair all the damage that may have been caused. And there were several programs for individual assistance, rental assistance, and other types of assistance for individuals for the loss of personal property. The frustrations with that is there were often several people or officials who weren't satisfied with that, who felt that they should have gotten more. So like FEMA would replace a television set if you lost it. And somebody would say, well, we had 3 television sets. Why can't we have them all replaced? You know, and I try to explain that this is how your congressman wrote the federal law. I didn't write it. The state didn't write it. The federal government wrote it. And so that was a frustration. Another frustration was a real lack of support for the smaller units of government. And that wasn't often because of the individuals in charge. It's because they had a real small tax base. And they're severely challenged in doing some of the things that need to be done. We had some smaller townships and villages up north that had huge bills for debris removal. And even with federal assistance, the remaining cost was oftentimes multiples of their annual budget. And another frustration with the smaller jurisdictions was just having a person to do the emergency management work. Oftentimes it was assigned to chief deputy or someone who was in the public works department. So they had this responsibility on top of their day-to-day job responsibilities. And there was a lot of federal guidance for planning and exercising and things like that. And they just didn't have the resources to do it. And some people could be real nasty and crabby about that. And sometimes you just kind of suck it up and don't complain back, because that's a losing situation. But there were a lot of good wins. We bought a lot of property out of floodplains, and those people will never get flooded again. And a lot of people were really helped by what we did. We had a really bad flood in 2007. We got a presidential disaster declaration for individual assistance and for public assistance. And we were up and running for weeks with this flood. And an individual in Spring Green was interviewed by one of the local television stations. And his comment was, "Where's FEMA?" And we're sitting in the State Emergency Operations Center, we're going like clutching our hearts. And within 20 minutes, we had a call from the governor's office. Well, we had a FEMA representative in the Emergency Operations Center. And it's private information if you're receiving federal government assistance. We can't have access to that, but this FEMA person could. And she called to FEMA and found out that this person was registered with FEMA and was eligible for individual assistance. We called the governor's office and he says, "Well, all right, you got a lick from him, but I'm not going to give you a lick. You're doing what you're supposed to do." So that was very frustrating. I mean, you could feel this shockwave go through the room when this person said this on television, because we could see all the TV stations in the Emergency Operations Center. And I was the officer in charge on that shift, and I'm thinking, oh my God. And the FEMA person jumped in. She says, "I'll call." And within 20 minutes, we were back to the governor's office. So sometimes you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. and that's just life.
That's true. Thanks, Gary. I have maybe this will be our final question, since we're getting pretty close to time. And so this is another general question for our three panelists. So, and I guess we'll start with Colin, and then we'll go to Hannah, and then we can end with Larry. But what are some things that you wish you had known before graduating that you see, being beneficial in your current job?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I love that this is the one you made me go first on. What do I wish I had known? I think there's just a lot I wish I knew about how the different organizations across sectors sort of interacted with each other, right? Like different levels of nonprofits, different levels of the government, and different levels of private firms and corporations. I think I only had like a very abstract sense of it. And I for a long time wanted to be a professor, which I am distinctively not. And I think I really wish I would have had a fuller sense of like how do nonprofits work with the government, and how do and I will speak at the federal level, but also at local levels. How do nonprofits actually come in and act as a supporting arm of the government for things that government can't do? And like, how do you find those nonprofits, right? And like find your way in. And I think I had a sense, which was reaffirmed, of like the way to get into a lot of places is you just like work really hard and do a bunch of volunteering and get to know a lot of people. And like some people call that volunteering internships. I call it volunteering, just because like my background was really in campaigns. And I think there's just like a lot of that I wish I knew about, right? Like how that works in nonprofit world, how that works in government world, how that works in campaign world, and how there's sort of like a byline through that. And then like, what's the private sector way of doing it, which is different and interacts at different points, right? Especially interacts with nonprofits in key ways, interacts with government, and sometimes adversarial, but sometimes like governments tap the private sector to deliver things that they are unable to do because they don't have the resources to do it. They don't have the legal ability to do it. And they don't necessarily have the people to do it. And so I think I just like, one of the things I have the like good fortune of now is like I get to kind of step back and see the whole landscape and see how these different organizations and the key individuals who sort of move between them and can bring them together, how that works. And it's just given me a much better sense of like how change happens. Like I am very much motivated by like trying to change things from, and specifically in a social and political sense, from where they are. So that was a long-winded answer because it was a difficult question.
Thanks, Colin. Hannah?
I think that I wish I had spent more time thinking holistically about what I wanted my future to look like, because I guess, I don't know, everything was kind of everything happened really fast. I did Peace Corps, and then while I was in Peace Corps, it was like, I was kind of like there thinking about like, okay, maybe I'll apply to grad school after this, and maybe I'll do this, or maybe I'll do that. And then we got evacuated, and suddenly I was back in Wisconsin, and I was not expecting that at all. So I guess my number one is I sure do wish I had known about the pandemic, but what do you do? So I guess professionally speaking, it's hard to say, because my big answer is that I wish I just knew more, because even now that I work in this field and I'm doing this every single day, there's always just like, I'm just constantly learning about how much I don't know. So yeah, I think just find your niche and stick with it. but that's also kind of a bad answer because sometimes you're going to find out randomly that maybe you just don't like something and you don't want to do it anymore. So I don't know. I wish that okay, here's my final answer. I wish that I had been more comfortable with going with the flow during my undergrad, because I think that I was convinced that I needed to have like a very rigid, like, this is my 2-year plan and my 5-year plan, and in 10 years this is where I'm going to be. And now I'm sitting here and I'm like, I think I want to be a firefighter, and that's just how things are. And that's what I've got.
Great, thanks, Hannah.
Yeah.
Larry?
I think I had an urge to teach. And when I was in the Air Force, one of the doctors that I worked with offered me the chance to go to Medical College of Georgia. And I said, thank you, Doc, but I think I want to be a history professor. Well, that didn't work out because I switched from history to geography. And I didn't realize how much teaching I would do in the job that I finally got. And I did a lot of teaching in that 28 years. And I got a lot of satisfaction out of that. And seeing what people were able to do with the material that I presented to them. And when I got this position at UW Green Bay, my snarky daughter, who likes to put pins in me, said, well, you see, you're finally a university professor. And I said, no, I am not. She goes, why not? I said, I do not have a piled higher and deeper. And she thought, yeah, that's Dad. He's irreverent. And, I finally came to peace with not completing that race with a PhD, because I realized that through the work that I did a lot of good. And I think if a person can look back and say, I did a lot of good, that's pretty good stuff.